Welcome everybody to YOUTHTOPIA Talks. For tonight's session, we are going to be discussing everything about the activist burnout. And we have a really cool lineup for all of you joining us tonight or today, wherever you are in the world. My name is Melati. I am 20 years old and a full-time changemaker, currently calling in from nighttime Bali, Indonesia. Joined with me today, meet the speakers. I cannot do enough justice introducing these incredible young changemakers and YOUTHTOPIA Circle of Youth members. I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves in an elevator pitch to you all. Clover, shall we start with you?
Sure, thanks Melati. First, some personal history. Melati and I went to school together, so there you go. But I am a 21-year-old climate activist and the founder and executive director of Force of Nature. We are a youth nonprofit working with students in 52 countries to help people our age shift from eco-anxiety to agency. And we work with an enabling ecosystem of decision makers across business and policy to ensure that those who have historically been left out of decision-making spaces have a seat at the table. Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Clover, as always, guys, I have a literal fangirl moment at this stage for all of the speakers. I'm just so in awe and in admiration of the incredible work that they're doing in their own fields of expertise. So next up, you heard Clover. I went to school with her. A new friend that I have not yet had the pleasure to meet in person, Sara. Please step in and introduce yourself to the audience.
Of course. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Sara Mora. I'm an immigrant rights activist, founder of Population Mic. I'm a storyteller and poet, and I use the power of digital strategy and the internet to really bridge the gap between access to technology of local communities and low-income cities across America. The power of the internet is obviously growing and it's not going to stop. And as a person who grew up in a major city impacted by lack of access to education equality, and just growing up in an immigrant community as an immigrant myself, I saw firsthand the need for access to storyteller tools. And so that's why we created Population Mic. So I'm excited to share that with you all.
And I cannot wait to personally get to meet you, hopefully one day soon, Sara. Again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And also for the audience here joining in and tuning in, if you haven't noticed already, the speakers are all color coordinated. Also, guys, even in your profile pictures on the screen right now, they're all wearing black. It's insane. And here I am as your host wearing and no, this was not planned. So moving on to our last coordinated colored person, Mohamad, who is a dear, dear friend, someone that I had the absolute pleasure to meet. If I have to say one really big defining moment in my life, it was meeting Mo. So Mohamad, with all of my love in my heart, I'm sending it to you to take over the stage.
Thank you. Well, I'm 20 years old refugee activist and a refugee myself. I was born and raised in Syria. And as you know, when the revolution, which later became a war, I had to flee. And then I decided to start advocating for children's rights of education, specifically Syrian refugees. But then my work ultimately took a more of an international international scope. Currently, my organization called Gharse, which is Sprout in Arabic, is based on both Lebanon and in Sweden. And we're soon, hopefully, starting to work in Mexico if that's ever become successful. Our main base of work is our school in Lebanon, which graduates around 740 children each year. And we've been working for almost 6 years by now. We work on more of a holistic understanding of education, where we teach the mothers, the fathers, and the children rights, women rights, and human rights. And we also provide group psychological and individual therapy to all the students in our classes to deal with their traumas and with PTSD, because that's the most of the children we work with. And we're trying to introduce this holistic approach to education to other countries, to other schools, to other people. So yeah, that's who I am shortly.
In a nutshell. And that was from Mohamad, Sara Mora, and Clover Hogan, our speakers for today's YOUTHTOPIA Talks, all about the activist burnout. You can tell that all of these young people have a lot on their plate. a long to-do list. And that's why I thought it was relevant to have all of you joining us tonight to talk a little bit in depth, not the sugarcoating talk, but really what it means, what it looks like to have a burnout. But we'll start off easy with a couple warm-up questions. So let's begin the talk. And that's for each of the speakers in one word. How can you describe your activism during the time of the pandemic?
I would say I can kick it off. My activism, my work in the pandemic was audacious.
Okay. Oh, I see Clover and Mohamad going like,
It's so hard I'm going to do 2 words. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to say exponential, but also very messy.
For real.
I can relate. Yeah. Mohamad, what about you?
I would say with working in Lebanon, I would say very stressful.
Stressful, audacious, exponential, and Clover, what was your second word again?
Messy.
Yeah, I think one word, that's a tough one. Okay, but that was a warm-up one. The next one is about the topic of tonight. In one word, yes or no, have you experienced a burnout before?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. Not one, that's for sure.
On a weekly basis, maybe?
On a weekly basis.
Goodness, really? Okay, so can someone probably do more justice than me in explaining what a burnout is? I mean, you guys were all so quick to jump, and I'm going to look at Clover a little bit because in a weird way, I see you as sort of like the expert in our emotional well-being, right? With the work that you do at Force of Nature. Share a little bit of, well, how would you define what a burnout is?
I think burnout is very, at least in my experience, very surprising based on how it can kind of creep up on you. I think it's when you reach your capacity, basically. So every day you show up with a certain capacity of how much you can do. And if you do that for a really long, sustained period of time without checking in on yourself and really saying like, how am I actually showing up today? You can reach a tipping point, and that can manifest in lots of different ways. I think for me, it can be like, I will just lose my love for the work. So it starts to feel like an incredible chore because I'm on this kind of hamster wheel of trying to get things done. And more extremely, it can show up for me in like terrible anxiety and panic attacks and like spontaneous crying on the tube where I'm like so at that capacity that I just like can't do another minute of work or even think about the work that I'm setting out to do. So that's my experience.
And Clover, I think a lot of burnout is actually related to feeling eco-anxiety as well, of
Definitely.
This overwhelm of, where do I even start? Does it even matter? All of these questionings that make us overwhelmed. And I know you at Force of Nature just released a report actually with a study of a lot of young people who experience eco-anxiety. Can you share some numbers with us?
Yeah, sure. So we found by talking to over 500 young people in 52 countries that 70% of them said that climate change has a negative impact on their mental health. They experience eco-anxiety and
Oh, Clover, we lost you.
And did you just lose me?
You're back.
Yeah, I think it's a fossil fuel lobby trying to cut off my internet.
Oh, we lost her again. I've never heard that one from a climate activist before, but that is a good one, a good conspiracy theory that I'll maybe use every now and then. But Mohamad, to you while we wait for Clover to come back on. You mentioned straight away, Clover was the first one that said yes to the first question of have you ever experienced a burnout? And you mentioned definitely not once. So what does that mean? How does a burnout look for you? If you feel comfortable opening up a little bit more about that experience for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like as a person before, as an activist and as a refugee, it's been an occurring situation. We come from a very, the best way to put it, a complicated areas, war-torn countries, and Lebanon as a failed state, and our work on the ground has of course, it affects all of us personally. My burnout generally comes from seeing the impact of this dire situations and the people that I work with. My work has been and always will be based on the ground. I've never took my work to more of a let's say social media level or all these things. I've always worked on the ground. So I feel like the people that I work with are part of my family, part of community, especially as a refugee. You lose the meaning of home, so you create a home to yourself. And when you feel that the new home you've created is also being slowly maybe destroyed or slowly being beaten in a way, that causes a sense of instability and insecurity. And with the reoccurring struggles in the Middle East and in a global level with refugees, it definitely struck back to me as a person and how I perceive myself. A lot of the burnouts comes from a position of guilt. We've been talking about this before. I currently live in Sweden, a first world country, and with the first world country issues. And when I talk with people, I find myself quite distant, and I just feel guilty of being where I am and doing what I'm doing currently in Sweden. So the recurring burnouts are generally comes from a very personal space, I feel. And when it comes to the future and for instance, I don't really get burnouts of that because I don't really think about the future much. That's partially because we work on the ground, so we're more involved in what can we do now. And when we can't do anything now, we get a burnout.
I remember meeting you for the first time, and you were like, I'm not an optimist, I'm a realist. I focus on what's happening right now, today. And it is true. It is that frustration oftentimes of and the guilt. And we haven't spoken about that in this panel. That was during our little speaker briefing.
Yes, sir. Yes.
We will get into that in a moment. I just wanted to pop over to Sara because when I asked the first question, of have you ever experienced a burnout? Both Clover and Mo straight away jumped, whereas you had a more silent approach of, I saw your face going, So talk to us a little bit more about your burnout experiences, or have you never experienced a burnout? What's it like for you?
Girl, I absolutely have. And it's been multiple times. And it's been am I up from my burnout, or am I really just coping, right? I think for me, a lot of what I do, or all of what I do, is fueled by anger of personal experiences, my parents' experience on a day-to-day basis, as my mom cleans houses and my father's a mechanic. And I think in the broader context, it's hard to exist as an immigrant, speaking of a US context, as an activist, because there is a set standard on what activists have been able to accomplish at a federal level on immigration policy. And I think just off the bat, when I started, the fact that I had to stop college, I think makes everything really awkward, because it makes me have more than one option for where I want to go next. And that also makes me feel selfish, right? And really guilty. The fact that I can choose if I want to try to go into school in the fall through scholarships and stuff, of course, but still be able to choose, while I have friends whose families have been divided by deportation. And, I work with communities that are 100 times more criminalized than even just my local low-income city. It's just a big blob, to be honest. And burnout, I think, is unfortunately still very much at the root of the work that I do, where when I went in more full-time when I was in high school, I noticed the pattern of there was almost an air of encouragement for young people to sacrifice their every part. And that within itself is a privilege in context of international conversations of activism, when I think of Mohamad. But I think existing in the US is a constant pull, where a lot of us have to choose our happiness or our parents' happiness. And even just last night, the governor of New Jersey passed licenses for undocumented immigrants of all status, which is a huge win. And I told my mom that win felt bigger than if they would have passed financial aid for me. And I started crying, and she was like, don't say that. We need you. We want you in school. And I'm just it's just this constant pull, right? Of what joy do you choose? And I think for me, recovering from burnout and working on health in my community is a priority, especially after COVID and language accessibility issues at a federal level, but it's all still very messy. So my delay in answering is because I'm very much still trying to recover.
Right.
And
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much for joining us and speaking up about it in this time, and I think I reflected so much on what you were saying and can relate to a lot as well. And I want to make sure that in this space, we also talk about the fact of what you were just mentioning of like romanticizing burnout, right? Like it's either we choose this path or this path and nothing in
Right.
between. Almost like
Right.
feel sacrifice. And I it is almost like this narrative, and I'm sure Clover has a lot of interesting things to say as well, but I wanted to still feed or like chew a little bit more on the root cause of burnout. What are the drivers of burnout? Because I heard so many common words from all of you listening to you. It was like, guilt, anger, selfishness, the choices, the privilege. What do you guys think? Where does burnout really come from?
I will dive in. Hopefully you can hear me now. We just moved house, so the Wi-Fi is like all over the shop, which is great in a day when I have like 10 speak engagements. But I think it comes from my personal experience in a couple of ways. So the first thing is, and I think this is particularly true when you are a young activist as well, and you start out young, is that so much of your identity is wrapped up in your activism. So you kind of become known as the changemaker or become known as the activist. I think that's probably that you can relate to, Melati, having started at a really early age also. And with that, it also means that it's really difficult to separate your attachment to the outcome from the work that you show up and do every single day. So I've found it incredibly difficult to just show up and do the work and then not be attached to the end outcome, like whether that policy change happens or whether that solution gets pushed through or whether that leader actually sits down and listens to you. So I think that's a big part of it, because your sense of like worth can get wrapped up in things that are fundamentally outside of your control. And I think it's also, to your point, the kind of glamorization of like hyper productivity and this idea that you always need to be like on the hustle, you need to grind, and that's how you get ahead in life. And even though the emotions that we allow, it's like if you look at social media, you're constantly like promoting your successes and wins and achievements, and you're much more it's much more unlikely that you're going to talk about when you're incredibly anxious and panicked and stressed about the future. So I think it's a combination as well, that even when those feelings bubble up within ourselves, like the anger or stress or sadness, we often disallow them and we suppress them rather than listening to them as, oh, my body is giving me the indication that I need to like stop or slow down or breathe. So it's a myriad of factors, but a big part of it is our cultural conditioning and what we deem to be normal at the expense of our own mental well-being.
Yeah. Mo, what do you think?
I mean, really, it's relative things. Maybe if I can boil it down to an experience, it would be easier for me to talk about it. Like what causes my burnout generally, or the serious ones, are seeing that people don't necessarily quite understand the complicated their role, or how complicated the issues are and their role in it. And sometimes I do as well. And also when I get disconnected from the work that I did. The experience that I was going to talk about briefly is, for instance, when I was in the World Economic Forum in Davos, in this like place where there's like world leaders, business leaders, and activists, and like all these important people, and then you sit with them and you realize that at first they know nothing about you, they don't want to know anything about you, and they're just there for the sake of, they just like place you there for the sake of, because you're a refugee. I remember, for instance, in one of the panel they had a refugee speaker, not even my name, and those are part of the identities that have been imposed on you in all of the stages. The other one is the disconnection from your work. That also part of that experience. I remember I met one of the politicians in Lebanon who's advocated for a lot of the prejudice regulations against refugees. But I could not call him out. I could not hold him accountable in a panel, partially because I'm a refugee and I have work there and it will affect it badly. They might lead to my team and my mother, who is part of the team, to get imprisoned or these things in countries like Lebanon. And then at that moment, I felt that does me being here, does me promoting my work, does me traveling to summits, doing like panels with these people really matters? Will it lead to any change? My answer was no. So I went back to working in my community in a very close, intimate relation with the beneficiaries, with their kids, with the children. And that, I think, that got me out of my burnout. The disconnection and the constant feeling of you're alone is what usually caused the burnouts for me. And also the guilt, as we've talked about that before.
Yeah. And I think it's also this element of like it being all out of your control in a system that you did not create nor agree to be a part of. And suddenly you find yourself in the middle of it, right? And I think that that's, yeah, it was a whirlwind back in January last year where both of us were in the Alps, the snowy Alps, with the very important people at Davos. And yeah, I mean, it is a whirlwind. And I think, Sara, something that you maybe relate to in the work that you do with Population Mic and like really connecting with people on a real human level. What about you? What are some of the ways that you, identify or see the burnout drivers for you?
Yeah, I think also, especially the time we're in where I'm sure it's happened in the past and it just hasn't been recorded also, but like, I think especially being in a time like now where the internet's so accessible and the fact that I've been able to create such a big community makes me feel more urgency to finding out ways to redirect resources. But like Mohamad said, there are just things that are so much bigger than us and that are a lot deeper and that can't be broken down just with the tools you're aspiring to use for the movement. And so I think how big the human rights fight is always the reason of my burnout, because I understand that nothing I do in my lifetime will fully change the world. And that sounds really dark, but it's like not really, you know what I mean? I think it's something that we all need to, I think a lot of people think that. And I think being a young person that started young, it was just like, you're so young, it's so amazing. And I'm like, it's not all amazing. And I'm not trying to be negative. It's just things are real. You know what I mean? And I think I am also still processing everything Mohamad said. And I think I resonate so much that it's like making me hard to share my burnout stuff because exactly to everything he said, right? Like, I feel like I'm always triggered, always mad, and I'm always existing in spaces where I do feel like I'm just there because I'm an immigrant. And it's like, will I be able to continue to exist in certain spaces or will I have to regress, like he said? And I think I have in many ways, in existing at the border, working on strategy without necessarily talking about it for these past 2 years has been amazing, because no one knows what I do. When they click on my Instagram, they just see some cool partnerships, but they don't know I've been on the ground for 2 years. And I think that's important to me because that's the work that allows for a community to exist, just more loudly and like decentralized, which is what Population Mic is about, right? There's so much to say, but I think, yeah, burnout is real and it doesn't make us abnormal. If anything, we just need to remember that it's a marathon and not a race, and that we are existing to help in the broader picture of the fight, but it's definitely really personal. So it's, not something you could really tell everyone else about, but more so share your own experience. But yeah.
Yeah. And, Sara, I have that every time Mohamad speaks to me, even if it's casually, I'm still digesting every word of wisdom. But same goes for Clover and for you. I'm just sitting here, and to be honest, like personally as well, because I realize I'm just the one asking the questions, and I want to share as well, and, make it a little bit more personal. I feel like I'm in the middle of a burnout at the moment. Like, there's so much going on all the time, and it's really difficult. And, like I plan, I don't know if any of you relate to this, but like I plan my rest and I never rest in the planned rest time. Or like, I have to block away time for myself, and it has to be more than a weekend or a getaway, just, it needs to be a solid amount of time, but it has to be like a month out for there to be a time where it's the calendar allows it. So, it's kind of that like speedy catch up of, kind of going in a circle to the point where exactly what has just been shared earlier in the talk of like, Clover, what you said, right? Like losing the love in what you do, which sucks because like it's driven by love. It's driven by this connection and this bigger need. And then what I liked, Mo, what you said, and Sarah as well, is like that work on the ground is kind of how you put your feet back in the soil, like connect really to what's important. And it doesn't always mean media interviews or podcasts or webinars. But let's go back to the question list, and I have to pull it out now because my brain is blank. What is next? Okay, let's talk about the dialogue of burnouts and whether we think enough of it is being done at the moment. Do we think we're having real honest conversations about this or not?
I can jump in quickly. I definitely don't. I think it's also like, if I look at the way that we talk about like youth activism, for example, and this is kind of building on your point as well, you know, it's so glamorized. It's like, it's very aspirational to like be a youth activist, like commit your life to this, whatever. But I think what we often don't recognize is like how much of it is driven by like despair and anxiety and frustration and anger. And I've learned in my activism that I can only sustain those feelings for so long before I, to that point, lose the love for what I'm doing. And I think if anything, like I really hate the kind of like expectations that can be placed upon you, and like you can almost be like guilted for not wanting to show up for all of the things. Like even the other day I was like, wow, I'm really at my capacity, and so I turned down, you know, a speaking opportunity, and I was made to feel guilty. It's like, why wouldn't you want to talk at this thing? Like why wouldn't you want to contribute either way? And I think if anything, that's almost worsened during the pandemic because everything has gone to a digital interface. I find myself like scheduling meetings back to back to back without any breaks, where pre-pandemic you would go and, you know, meet people and you would connect with your community, and there was a lot more that possibly nourished the work. Now it's just very easy to get sucked into a bit of a digital vortex and feel that you need to have like all cylinders firing at all times, which is really difficult. And I think it's often a bit of a shocker, particularly when talking with adults, to bring to their awareness like eco-anxiety and the fact that, you know, 70% of the young people we've worked with feel incredible despair and hopelessness around the future. It's not like we're all kind of like banner blazing in the streets and feeling super inspired and empowered. Like a lot of us are just really tired and uncertain, and it's normal to feel that way, but I don't think we've really normalized it.
No, and also the conversation, right, is not really happening. The spaces for us to talk about these things, like I'm going through burnout, what the hell do I do? What am I, you know, how can I get help? Where do you, Mo and Sarah, think that these conversations need to be held more of? Like, who wants to go?
I can go just to give maybe Mo a moment. But yeah, I think for me, I'm always mad. Seriously, guys, like literally, I'm always mad. I'm always angry. And especially at things like that. Like we should definitely be making it comfortable and okay for people to say, I'm tired and I can't show up. And I've been thinking so much since COVID about the ways that I can show up in the platforms I exist in more than real than I have always been. And I feel like I'm always pretty straightforward, like to the point where people are like, oh my God, girl, you're making me uncomfortable, you know? But at the same time, I feel like even with this conversation of burnout, there's levels to this. And like, if you're working a whole bunch of jobs because you exist in your community, like, of course you're going to burn out. So I think there's definitely not enough conversation. I am working to put out more resources, right? Versus the conversation. And in addition to the conversations about burnout, I want to be able to really be super straightforward about the amount of resources that exist. So I've been actively sharing in making private group chats that would normally be about work, blasting free or affordable resources for friends that I know that are leading pretty detrimental initiatives in New York City and across the country that then affect the way certain issues are advocated for, as a way of contrasting the normal flow and cycle of things.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And it is frustrating. There is a lot of madness, a lot of frustrations. But Mo, maybe a different question slightly for you. Why are we not talking about it more?
I mean, That's a hard question. I mean, I think like I want to speak less because my experience with activism might be slightly different from you guys. I mean, Melati knows this, that like maybe since I started like joining the panels and all like the speakers, maybe like becoming like a more of a public speaker, I realized that that's not what I want to do. So I boiled down like. I went down again, like I calmed down. I started like rejecting everything, and I decided to stop participating unless it's a small, unless it's like not a small, more of an intimate discourse between the speakers and between the panel, like this one, for example, because I really want to learn from people who work like whose work on the ground, young people like myself, and this. So I've never felt that there isn't necessarily a conversation about that, because I don't know what causes the burnouts from that levels of commitment. But there's definitely not a conversation about and why there isn't a conversation when it comes to activism in areas or in communities like I work with. I don't think because we can afford the luxury of having conversation about that. And that's a very important point to highlight. Having conversation about activism burnout or personal burnout is in one way or another, it's a luxury. And people outside communities, people who live in like in Europe, for instance, need to understand that in generally it is a luxury. I remember one point we were all taking a break in Lebanon, and we wanted to like just take a break and work slowly, and then the explosion happened. And then we had to, like, if the whole team was on panic mode, and we were in panic mode for 2 months, and then the pandemic, and then, you know what I mean? So in these communities, in these areas, when you're so close into working with them, when you're part of them, it's really becomes in a way, which I don't necessarily agree with, let me put it this way, but in one way or another, it becomes a luxury to speak about those things. So what do you do? What I try to do is I always try to find people who I could talk about these things to, and also to not plan my rest, but rest whenever I can. That's one important thing. Resting is very important. You should rest whenever you should, when you feel like it.
I know, Mo.
So yeah.
You know me.
I know. I know you. Yeah, we talked. Yeah, but that's one of the things. I think people still perceive not perceive. It's kind of real, but it's also a perception that talking about burnouts is a luxury. So that's why they try to avoid that. And people don't really want to face the issue. A lot of them, they don't want to face the reality of how harsh the situations could be on your mental health. Let's speak of. I'm one of these. I've never sought professional help yet. I still kind of feel like, why wouldn't I? I've never did. So I'm guilty of that as well. Yeah. But that's just me being honest, you know.
Well, I feel like I'm in the same boat. I don't know about our other speakers. Clover.
It's quite funny because like we direct a lot of young people in our network to like mental health professionals, and much of the work that we do at Force of Nature is open sourcing like mental health toolkits and creating safe spaces for young people in frontline communities to connect through their feelings as they take action on climate. And yet I never do it for myself. And I kind of had that like aha moment where I was like, you're in this space of always trying to be in service of others and making that available. And then you realize like the inconsistency in your own life. So I've definitely like daddled in like seeking out mental health support, but no, I'm the same as like Mo. I wish that I would prioritize it more than I do currently, for sure.
So how can we find or see the symptoms within ourselves as well when we're reaching this point where it's like, hey, pay attention? What are some of those things that you think we can look out for?
I think I've started checking in with my like capacity each day and thinking, you know, like how am I actually doing? Like not, and I think that also translates to the questions that we ask one another. And, you know, every Force of Nature team call starts with like a 30-minute really candid check-in where there is no pressure to conform to the expectation of I'm fine, how are you doing? But like, let's actually talk about what's going on in our lives and let's be vulnerable. And I think to your point, Melati, like just talking about it and saying I'm going through a period of burnout, like I need to take a step away, that vulnerability can be an incredible act of courage. And again, I think self-care or looking out for ourselves like looks radically different for every single person, and there is no right or wrong. Like that can be planting yourself in front of Netflix for a couple of hours, or it can be like going offline, or like I am really admiring of what you did, Mo, and saying like, actually, I just don't want to interface in those panels and engagements. I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I'm like brave enough to quite do that, but I hope I am one day, because it is just about acknowledging your own boundaries and then like backing yourself enough to actually establish them.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, what about you? What are some of the signs that you kind of listen for in your body, physically, mentally, where you're like, okay, this is my moment where I need to step away?
When I was like 2 months into the pandemic, I started to basically take on pro bono clients for Pop Mic, which I've done since I began. I mean, everything is pretty much pro bono at this point. But I started to just like, I mean, I was already working at a pretty intense pace, but that just multiplied by like 35. And I was literally sitting in my little corner up until like 5 a.m. every day, just like madly working. And I mean, that's pretty much the flow of work in immigration reform, because it's like policies always potentially being passed, and like then out of the potential, like a slice of what is proposed is passed. But I think what I watch out for is just no longer being mentally present. And though from generational, passings, my family didn't go to therapy, right? Like I have no trace of having the privilege of looking for health support, and especially not still in the family, in my parents' life right now. So I began to do my research and take some aggressive time. And I'm stressing aggressive because took so much of me to just start to look for therapy that was affordable. And undocumented people do not qualify for health insurance in the USA. So I think a lot of times when we think of therapy, you're like, of course not, right? We have bills to pay. We're not about to sit here and put that money towards mental health, because we're tough and we're going to figure it out. And in Spanish say like, averiguamos, right? Like we figure out the way to make it, to pull through. And I was like, I'm not going to be the person who's sitting here looking for help. I've come this far, right? But I think I said, I'm done with that. And I did start therapy, and that is crazy. When I tell y'all, if I would go back to my 17-year-old self and tell her she would start therapy, she would be like, girl, what is wrong with you? Like, you're not a punk, right? And it's because of my culture, right? It's because we're like, you know what I mean? Like toughen up, get up, and we're gonna make it work, because it's too much trauma on top of trauma that, like Mohamad said, you don't have the privilege of sitting here and being like, OMG, do I feel okay? Like, unfortunately, even though that sounds heavy, do I feel okay is a privileged question, right? Like once you're in a place like that, to me, I saw it as, if I am capable of standing here and asking myself today if I'm okay, I'm going to run with that, because then that means I'm going to be more capable health-wise later on down the line. And though it doesn't make me feel comfortable that I was able to start therapy, I felt like it was a radical act to do so, because then I would be able to figure out ways to continue to bring access to health education, and in whatever context, right, be part of bringing that example to my peers. Because I grew up seeing so many examples of like elders that I looked up to that were exhausted, that had PTSD, right, that were just so traumatized and still are. And I think a sign for me was just being like a robot, right? Like you're just like numbly working, and that looks different for everyone. So I'm just speaking for my context. And yeah.
No, I definitely feel that last bit, especially like of feeling like a robot, is a sign. Sometimes I catch myself saying like, oh, I can do that in my sleep. And I'm like, well, oh, wait 1 second. Because I want to be awake, I want to be there, but sometimes things just don't like excite me anymore, or feel like I can expect it with no surprises. And I think that takes a lot of why we got started in the first place as well.
I think it's really important to highlight that the lead up to burnout is often not negative, like if that makes sense, because I think we have this sense that it's like, oh yeah, I'm feeling really anxious and stressed, that means I'm getting burnt out. But for me, it's sometimes when I'm like in my flow more than ever before, and it's like that almost like hyperactive energy where it'll be like 12 in the morning and I'm still working, and my boyfriend's like, do you think this is a good idea? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm getting so much done, I feel so good, I'm being like mega productive. And then like the next day I'm just like completely shattered and I can't show up in the way that I want to. So I think like your idea around scheduled rest is a really good one. And I've spoken to quite a few activists in, environmental racism, in social justice, in climate, who have said they've learned to schedule that downtime so that if they have like a big speaking engagement or a big project that they're pushing through, they'll make sure that they take the next 2 days out, because they know that they're going to feel really, really low. They're going to feel zapped, and forcing themselves to show up in those instances is just going to like deplete them even more. So I think, the signs of burnout aren't always like bad feelings. It can be like it's almost like addictive to be like incredibly productive. So it's knowing like when to set those boundaries upon yourself.
It is. And I think it also that everything really ties back to that. I think as a young change maker as well, we get into it for, a lot of the right reasons. And that's why we're able to put all of this energy in for this bigger vision. But without knowing it, we forget a lot of things. Like I found myself in the habits of like forgetting to eat or drink water because I was just so focused of what was in front of me and what I had to do and what I had to achieve, that I started to forget about the things that were really important, and really making space that it matters and that it's important. But that leads me to my next question. Do you think that burnouts, especially for young change makers, are can we avoid them, or is it inevitable?
I would say we don't need to avoid. I would say like burnouts in a one way or another is actually beneficial, because like I was thinking and I was hearing, and I remember like one very important lesson I learned from the Syrian revolution and from people who participated, like my mother and people, my family members, my friends who also they got the burnouts in a more of a harsher situation where they where they were in prison because they were in prison during the revolution. And regardless of all the torture that they've received, all the time that they've spent in the prison, they've always believed in the core values of their own type of activism. And that came out from them asking themselves two questions: who am I and why am I doing this? And as long as you can answer this, you can escape your burnout. As long as you can answer this, you can avoid the burnout. But you don't ask yourself these questions until you get a burnout. I made my decision of dropping the public speaking or like minimizing my public speaking when I ask myself these questions. Who am I and why am I doing this? Am I an activist? Am I a refugee? Or am I just a kid who wanted friends, so he built a school? And I realized that I'm just a kid who wanted friends, so I built a school. So I went back to my school and to my friends. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this to maximize happiness. I don't really much pay attention to educating people, nor making people care about me or the work I do. I did this to maximize happiness, to find happiness and maximize it to the people that I deeply care about. So I went back to the school, and that's how I've avoided burnouts. And whenever I feel burnout, I ask, who am I and why am I doing this? And under any harsh circumstances, from being in prison to being tortured to being sitting at home and just being overwhelmed by work, I felt that these two questions could easily take you out of whatever feeling you are in. It could easily make you avoid the burnout or escape the burnout. But to ask yourself these questions, you need to get the burnout. So I don't think of course, it's negative, but I think there's always goodness in bad things. And also that's one of the things that we learned in the revolution. There's always goodness in chaos. No matter how chaotic your brain is, no matter how chaotic everything around you is, there is goodness, but you need to find it. So yeah, I think that's how you avoid them.
I almost want to be like, and that's a wrap. Ladies and gentlemen, we can go home now. Like, there's nothing more to be said. Mo, again, always. I'm like, literally, I had water in my eyes, being like goosebumps, because it's who am I and why am I doing this? At the end of the day, that is what we need to know at our core and really feel it, not something superficial for Instagram followers or for a good college, application, but really, and you couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, Mo. Sarah, Clover, what about you? Do you guys think that a burnout as young change makers, can we avoid it? Or is it kind of like what Mo said, once we go through it, then we'll be able to come back better and stronger and ask really important questions?
I agree that it's inevitable because of the environment that I also grew up seeing, and how I mean, the framework of the work wasn't an option, right? Everybody's working in survival mode. But I also think for me, it's been not avoiding burnout, but kind of remembering my essence. And I'm a really hyperly positive person. Like, it's really annoying how positive I am, because I'll be like in the worst predicaments. And I'm like that meme of the little dog that's around fire. It's like, this is okay, right? And that's really me. And like, sometimes I'm like, why am I like this, right? Am I like so traumatized that I'm just always smiling or like always trying to make something colorful? And I think, no, right? On the contrary, like we all have gifts. I really am a firm believer we're not here by accident, and not to be overly spiritual, but I believe in God. So I believe that, you know, we all have a set of things we carry within ourselves that allow us to fully show up in our essence. And I think not necessarily to avoid burnout, but to work through a cycle of life that is inevitably evolving. It involves continuing to ask yourself questions like Mohamad just asked so perfectly. Like, that's pretty much how I operate, right? Like, what, like in everything I do, for me, it's about the purpose behind it, right? And about understanding that I'm a placeholder amongst so many people, but I'm also a vessel of hope, right? By existing, thinking, and believing that I can change the world. And I think having a core, having a foundation, and going to that foundation and understanding what are your love languages, like what are the things that for you even keep you going. And if that is finding joy, if that is art, if that is all of these things, how do you keep these alive in the midst of chaos and in the midst of what feels like 100,000 times bigger than yourself? And that's how I work through my seasons. I make sure that when I lose myself, I go back to church, right? I go back to art, I go back to music, I go back to intimate time with friends, right? That isn't recorded. But yeah, I think at the core, it's such a hard time to do that in a time like now, especially in the US. Speaking from the US context, a lot of movement spaces operate from a very, very different place than ever before. And so even the most humbly unknown activists is unfortunately getting wrapped into the cycle of what it is like, right, to be in the US right now. So I think it's all really tricky, but for me, it helps to understand that if my being is operating from joy, I need to figure out where to fit that into, and not necessarily have anybody else accept that, just me accept it for myself and figure out how to use that in the work I do.
Again, another just sort of mind-blowing moment. I'm here. If you've been on some of the webinars, I'm always like book and pen in hand, and I'm just absorbing all of this wisdom. Just absolutely, again, thank you, Sara, for sharing that with us. Clover, what about you? Do you think it's avoidable or inevitable?
I don't think we should try to avoid it, which is maybe kind of like counterintuitive to everything that's been said. But I think it's a really inevitable part of your journey. Like, if you think about growing up as a kid and how you learn really fundamental lessons, like I shouldn't put my hand in a flame because I will burn myself. You can read about how hot that flame is or how dangerous that fire is, but in essence, you're going to learn by getting too close to the fire and then backing up and realizing, oh, okay, that's not a good thing, or that's my limit. And I think it's true of this as well. I think it's a really inevitable part of the process that you understand what those triggers are, you understand your own boundaries. And I think part of that is not allowing others to project their own story of who you are or how you show up or how you choose to show up, and just kind of getting back to the source of this is what it means to be me. And I think when in the years where I first started being a spokesperson around climate, I almost became like a caricature of myself, because I felt this real pressure to be like positive and optimistic, and also almost be like the the reaction against people who were feeling really doomsday and dystopian. And yet in doing so, I was disallowing my own experience and my own feelings. And I realized that that isn't me when I show up. Like, that's 10% of who I am. So I think showing up with your whole self in those spaces is really, really important, and not shying away from the difficult feelings, because they are inevitable, and we shouldn't try to like experience our lives through a really narrow window of what success should look like, or achievement, or happiness, or any of those things. Like, the thing that makes all of those feelings so bright is also the despair and the stress and the anxiety. So being able to hold those feelings within yourself, and then also building up a community of people who you really trust to hold you in those feelings as well, I think is incredibly powerful. And I think that's easily the highlight of the work that I get to do and that we get to do at Force of Nature, is getting to connect with incredible young people like those on this call who just get it and understand it, and being aware of the environments that you place yourself in. And a lot of my work is kind of engaging with like climate deniers and people who are so embedded within a bubble of climate privilege that they just don't get it. And I've now reached a point where I'm like, okay, I can only spend a small amount of my time in those spaces and those environments before I completely lose my marbles. So I need to make sure that I really don't compromise on spending most of my time with people who are going to hold me in those feelings.
Mm-hmm. Wow. We have like a couple minutes left with you guys, and I'm just so blown away. I'm trying to catch up with my brain and my thoughts. But I wanted to also make sure that we were ending on a positive note, on a way where, you know, we all feel, and we have spent almost an hour talking about the realness of burnout, the fact that we shouldn't shy away from it, but actually face it head on and come out asking meaningful questions, reflections, and going back to the purpose, right? That's at the end of the day what we need to be fully connected with. But what are 3 things that keep you personally really rooted, grounded, happy? What are 3 tangible things that you try and remember or do or talk about every single day to keep you kind of in check? Who wants to start on the happy note?
Yeah,
Like,
I'll go. Well, definitely coffee, because we drink coffee for everything in Costa Rica. So my mom and me will wake up and she'll be like, "Cafe," and I'm like, "Yeah." And then she'll come back from work and be like, "Cafe," and I'm like, "Yeah." And then at the night before we go to bed, like the cuckoo people that we are, she'll be like, "Cafe," and I'm like, "Yeah," right before we go to bed. So definitely coffee, God, and good old fashioned spending time with friends, going for long walks, music, comedy. I love comedians. I love laughing. And yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Clover, what about you?
My first thing would be like future envisioning. I think it's really easy to define yourself based on what you're reacting against and what you're fighting against. And it's equally important that you remind yourself of what we're working toward. So definitely creating space to visualize that future so I can see where we're headed. The second thing would be time in nature, like just not compromising on like sitting outside and reconnecting with the land every day. And then the third thing, it's so hard to get this down to a list. I think the third thing would be, not compromising on the things that are easy to like let fall to the wayside, like calling my family and checking in with friends and connecting with the people who I love.
Beautiful. Mo, the last one, what's your 3?
I think I would agree with both Sara and Clover. Like, people definitely is a very important thing. People you love, people that make you laugh, people that you just can chill and spend some good time with. That's a very important thing. I guess, like, to me personally, it would be definitely like just taking rest whenever I need to, like napping, sleeping. We're very big in sleeping. Just like resting, relaxing whenever you have to. It doesn't need to be in a specific time. I'm gonna stress that very much. and the third thing that keeps me happy, it's I think just like knowing what I need and what I want, like just like knowing what I want and always checking if that's actually something that I would like to do and that's something that I wouldn't like to do is really comforting. Checking with yourselves, as Clover has said before, checking with yourself every once in a while is it's thing that makes you feel that you appreciate yourself and you love yourself. So it's good to feel that at least you're loved by yourself, other than just, of course, loved by people. So yeah, I think those would be the 3 things.
And I think that's perfect ending as well. I mean, I feel a huge amount of responsibility to close such an impressive panel with impressive young individuals. But Mo, what your last point was, you have to love yourself. And I think it goes back to a childhood lesson. You have to have enough love for yourself to be able for you to be able to love and share that love with other people. You can't have burnt out people taking care of a burning planet. So if there's one takeaway from this conversation, is that we have to really, really sit in with ourselves, tune in and reflect back to our why, because that's what's this sort of touchstone that'll get you through anything. And I also just wanted to say thank you to all of you tuning in live. We're a small, intimate audience. This will be going out and being published later on Youthopia channels. Thank you, Mark, Carl, Michelle, for joining us and being super active, specifically on the chat, and Praise and Emma from the Youthopia team. Sarah, Mohamad, Clover, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think the one way that I kind of keep afloat from a burnout is the knowledge that we are not alone, or I am not alone. And it's conversations like this with you guys that really, you know, kind of spark the movement in me again to say like, okay, we're not alone, we've got this, and to wake up another day to just get back to it. So terima kasih, thank you. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much.
We love you too, Melati.
We love you too. Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.